Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the session on flaws in reasoning, fallacies. So, fallacies will be taken up as a session, I think, on 3 parts in the prime time slot. So, this week I'm going to at least introduce you to the general categories that make an argument flawed, and then I will probably take you over the next 2 sessions to all the fallacies or types of fallacies, right? So let's begin. The first thing that comes up here is, what is a fallacy? Now, fallacies can be, or a fallacy is, a violation of a criteria of a good argument, right? In simpler words, a fallacy is a flaw in an argument made by the author. Now, there can be intentional fallacy or unintentional fallacy. Some of the fallacies come or stem from not knowing that this is not how an argument should be structured. And in most cases, the flaw is one which is between the premise and the conclusion. Either it could be how they are connected, or it could be the nature of the premise, or it could be the nature of the conclusion. So technically, violations can be structural. That means how the premise and conclusion are connected. Irrelevant premises, that means the type of premises that are offered are not relevant to the conclusion or do not lead to the conclusion. Unacceptable premises. So this is a very interesting category and has the maximum number of fallacies in it. So we will study this in detail. And insufficient premises. Again, we are going to study what insufficient premises mean. Now, why is it important to understand fallacies or flaws in reasoning? It is important to understand fallacies or flaws in reasoning because, yes, A, you can get direct questions on them. B, the questions may not be direct into the flaw in reasoning, but it could be either to strengthen or weaken the argument. In strengthening the argument, you have to remove the fallacy, right? Or you have to justify that the author's fallacy is not a fallacy by stating some reason. And the same flawed reasoning could be, you could be asked to weaken it. So either you could state the fallacy or you could state the reason, not the direct name of the fallacy, but the reason why this is not a good argument. So there are questions directly asked about fallacies or indirect through strengthen and weaken. So remember, in strengthen, we remove the fallacy. We plug in the fallacy. And in weaken, we pinpoint it. Now, I will be taking you through the different fallacies by and by. But before that, I want you to write down the simple definition of the fallacy. Right? I'll give you a minute to do it. Great. So now, let's move on to the first category of fallacy, which is fallacies of structure. So note, I hope you have noted this down. Violations can be structural, irrelevant premises, unacceptable premises, and insufficient premises. Right? So after this, let's go to the first set of violations, which is structural. Now, under structural fallacies, we will be studying The first fallacy, which says begging the question. Begging the question has several types of flaws in it. There could be circular reasoning or the definition, question begging definition, where purposely the author's argument is twisted or the definition is twisted to suit the conclusion. Right? So what it is, we are going to come to it. You can note it down. Then we will study fallacies of inconsistency. That means premises are incompatible to the conclusion. Followed by fallacies of formal reasoning, which is deductive logic, which most of you are aware of, but we will quickly go over to them, which is denying the antecedent, affirming the consequent, undistributed middle term, and illicit distribution of the end term. Maybe you are not familiar with these names, but all of you have done deductive logic pretty well, and this fallacy also is incorporated in it. Right? So note it down. I'll give you 2 minutes. Alright, next I'm going to give you the list of fallacies of the irrelevant premise. So let's go back and see what this is. So we have done the fallacies of structure. Now we come to fallacies of irrelevant premise. And what are the fallacies we are going to study there? Irrelevant premise would be using wrong reasons or purposely drawing the wrong conclusion, where reasons are spoken of which are different and conclusion is being drawn incorrectly. Genetic fallacy, rationalization, and all the different types of appeals. So which is appeal to an irrelevant authority, appeal to tradition, appeal to novelty, appeal to poverty, appeal to majority. So these are some of the fallacies, in fact, you see happening every day on news channels, in our public rallies, and in the way we interact with each other. So note down the fallacies of irrelevant premise, and from these lists, we are going to do the main fallacies on which maximum questions are asked. So do note it down. And let me know if you have done it. Next we come to the third category, which I said had the maximum number of fallacies. Very, very interesting ones also. Fallacy is also a topic I love to teach because there is so much matter that you can pick up from around you. You know, how people argue, the kinds of mistakes they make, the kind of, faulty and hilarious reasoning that is undertaken. Another thing before I come to the unacceptable premise fallacy is that fallacies are questions, of course, but other than that, they make your core reasoning very strong. Because the moment you recognize the error in logic, after you are familiar with it, then you know exactly what you have to do when you are asked to strengthen or weaken. In fact, even in parallel reasoning, sometimes you have to parallel the logic used by the author. So how do you parallel the logic used by the author? Imagine you are so clear on the structure of the argument. You can see the flaw straight away because you have familiarized yourself with this session, and it's easy for you to recognize a similar kind of flaw. So in more ways than one, your core reasoning gets strengthened after doing this session. So of course, after the 2 or 3 sessions that we will take to wind this up, I will also be taking up a sheet where we will give you questions on the flaws, and then you have to recognize them, right? So unacceptable premises is a kind of fallacy where for some reason the same logic is not understood by the masses, or the kind of logic that you deploy to write the argument has some core issues in it. So what they are, we will study. This one is equivocation, ambiguity, fallacy of accent. This is something that is visible not on paper but when you talk. So I've just included it because it's an interesting fallacy to note. Fallacy of accent, where you stress on the wrong word, hence giving the same sentence a new meaning, right? For example, if I say, you tell me that you're going to get married. So I say, you are, meaning one, and I say, you are, meaning two. So the difference in the meanings has come only in the way I've stated the two same exact words, you are. So what is this you are signifying in the first case and in the second case? Quickly give me your answers in the chat box. So what was the first you are and what was the second you are? Yes, so I'm getting correct answers. Hasika, Bhavya. Correct answers. Atharv, correct. Madhav, Mehak. So yes, Mudit, that's correct. So there were two opposites actually. The first one was showing excitement, acceptability, and second one was showing doubt and some form of disappointment. So this is fallacy of accent, where the same two words can have different meanings. So I just thought, because it's not going to be there in the slide because it's not visible on paper, but it is something that you notice while talking. Misuse of a vague expression, right? Some term which has no correct definition, and I purposely ill-define it or use the ambiguity around that term, right? Illicit contrast, we will show you what that is. Fallacy of composition, and there is fallacy of division, right? There is false alternatives, very, very common and interesting fallacy is odd fallacy, which is moralistic and naturalistic fallacy. I'm going to spend time on that. Faulty analogy, very common fallacy. Wishful thinking, misuse of a principle, that happens a lot of time, not just in regular critical reasoning, but also in law and logic. And argument from fallacy. So let's go back to this and first note down this list, and then I'll change, and then you note down the other. As I said, unacceptable premises is a very, very, it has a long list of fallacies. So note down this list and then we move to the next one. So these lists I'm making you note down so that somehow, it's a very broad topic. If you put it into some form of heads, then for you also there is a lot of clarity. Tabling things, putting down lists or topics and subtopics always makes things easier for you to remember and you know, okay, this belongs to this group and this belongs to this group. So grouping somehow, you know, they gives you, lends a lot of clarity. Because when I teach you the lists, which I'm going to take it slowly so that you keep retaining the ones that we go through in the first go, then the ones that we go through in the second go, and you revise them. So the lists help you understand that this belongs to this group and the other one belongs to the other group. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next list, and you note it down. Okay, so has everyone noted down this list? Anyone still writing? Now is the time to speak up. Next we come to insufficient premise. Under insufficient premises we have data related fallacies. So one would be, you know, the sample size is insufficient, or the sample is fine but it is not representative of the whole area, and arguing from ignorance, not knowing the issue and then making your argument, or being in the dark and then making your argument. We will do this. And contrary to fact hypothesis, very, very interesting fallacy, and it will come up in the first round of fallacies that I take up, right? So insufficient sample, sample size is doubtful. We have done it in weaken and strengthen also. So when you see the fallacy and you go back and check your strengthen weaken sheet and discussions we've had, so we have weakened many arguments based on unrepresentative data. Even the class yesterday that I took, you know, there was one question on the representation. It was the Outlook magazine question, if you remember. So what was the flaw? How were we able to weaken it? We were able to weaken it because we said that the magazine readers do not represent the whole populace of that town. You know, you remember that question? So examples like these will keep coming up. Great. So note this down. Let me know once you have done it. And then we come to a very interesting category of fallacies. We have done it at length in strengthen weaken questions, which is causal fallacies. In fact, it's a very, very important aspect of strengthening and weakening, a whole theory that you get taught under causation. So you have confusion of necessary with a sufficient condition, right? So if something is necessary and we confuse it to be sufficient. So if I say only if you come tomorrow will we go. So your coming does not ensure our going. Your coming is necessary to our going, but it's not sufficient, which means you could come and still we may not go, right? We have done this at length in conditional logic, if you remember, right? Do give me a thumbs up if this is clear. Then we of course have post hoc ergo propter hoc. So something has happened afterwards. That means whatever has happened afterward is the effect of the cause which happened before. So post hoc ergo propter hoc we are going to take up at length. Then confusion of cause effect. Many times you have done this in strengthen weaken, where the author confuses cause and effect and cause with each other. And we have Gamla's fallacy. Not very important from questions point of view, but an interesting fallacy to note. In fact, when you earn money, when you become rich lawyers and you start visiting casinos, this is a fallacy you don't want to commit. right? I don't know if there are any casino or con movie enthusiast, but you see this fallacy happening a lot in casino films and con films, right? And causation correlation fallacy, confusing two things happening or present together to be the cause and effect of each other. So causation correlation fallacy is pretty similar to post hoc ergo propter hoc, slight difference, but both can be studied in the same vein. So please note down this list of causal fallacies. Most of it is already clear to you, so it will just be a revision of sorts. Once noted, let me know. And then we come to other fallacies. Mostly these are studied under refutation fallacies, where your argument is so weak that it does not stand the test of rebuttal. You can also call some of them rebuttal fallacies. For example, ad hominem, where you must have, most of you must be aware, where you are not challenging the argument, but you are, mudslinging the arguer, where you attack the speaker, the author. It happens so many times based on caste, knowledge, creed, religion. It's happening on our primetime televisions, news channels, which I'm very ashamed of. So should you be. Then two wrongs do not make a right. This has been so prevalent for the last 3 years. Every time you question something wrong that is happening around you, so and so got lynched, right? And you are told, this is also known as whataboutery. Then the person who's probably not supporting it but doesn't know what to say in defense starts saying, where were you when, so these people also got lynched, or where were you in 1800 when this happened? Of course I wasn't born in 1800. Naturally, if I were born, I would have protested then as well. So just because something bad happened in 1800, does it make something bad happening right now justifiable? So that's two wrongs making a right, which is a fallacy. It's a flaw in reasoning, and it is our main narrative if you follow news channels. So it's also now termed as whataboutery, because those people justify this wrong with something wrong that happened in the era before you were born, or when the dinosaurs tread the earth. Then there is straw man. Straw man is a regular politician's fallacy. It's the way politicians attack each other by looking at a term completely irrelevant in the argument as the main term. We are going to spend a lot of time on it. Red herring is distraction, nothing new. I hope you understand this, living in the narrative of, too many news channels and what is known as paid media. So, red herring. Slippery slope, I like to call it the parents' fallacy. It's very, very interesting. Slippery slope, where, parents who are scared of your growing up, and they immediately check you in on something you have done, and then they start narrating how so many other things can go bad because you just did this. So, a very interesting collection of fallacies here, and mostly my favorite part in fallacies, because the other fallacies, these are not very technical, but these are, still happening around us. So do note this down. So we are going to take some fallacies today from some of the categories, and then we will move on to more fallacies in the second part of the class. Right, so I think everyone has noted down the list of other fallacies here. So let's start with the structural fallacy list. And the first one that we will take up is begging the question. Now, begging the question, also known as petitio principii, entails making an argument the conclusion of which is based on an unstated or unproven assumption. That means in this case, there is no premise given to you. Just because I feel X is true, therefore X is true is the argument structure. Just because I feel X is true, therefore X is true is the argument structure. So logical form you can note down from here. Look at the first scenario. Paranormal activity is real because I have experienced what can only be described as paranormal activity. Is there any premise in this first argument? My conclusion is paranormal activity is real. And what is the reason behind it? Because I have experienced it. You know? So this fallacy is known as begging the question. Everyone wants the new iPhone because it is the hottest gadget on the market. So, look at the second one also. There is no premise. There is nothing to describe what is great about it. There is one term, hottest, and the assumption is hot things are wanted by everyone, so everyone wants it. God is real because the Bible says so, and the Bible is from God. So this is also known as circular reasoning. God is real because Bible is saying, and why is Bible correct? Because God wrote Bible. This typical of घर कहाँ है पेड़ के सामने, पेड़ कहाँ है घर के सामने, दोनों कहाँ है आमने सामने. So you can note down these examples, and I'll be back in exactly a minute. Sorry, have you got it? All right. Killing people is wrong, so the death penalty is wrong. So killing people and death penalty is one and the same thing, isn't it? So two different words meaning the same thing have been used. Smoking cigarettes can kill you because cigarettes are deadly. Kill you and deadly. So do you notice in begging the question, the premise uses the exact language of the conclusion. So one is not supporting the other technically. Any problem with any example here? Any problem with any example here? Great. So we move to the next one. Tautology or circular reasoning is a subcategory of begging the question, and it is the same thing. You know, where the defining or qualifying an argument in such a way that it would be impossible to disprove any part of it, right? So why can't you disprove it? Because the argument is structured in the same way. For example, with all of the jobs I'm bringing into the US, with all of the new auto plants coming back into our country, and with the massive cost reductions I have negotiated on military purchases, I believe the people are seeing big stuff. So it's impossible to disprove any part, because the first part and the second part are pretty much saying the same thing. I am good, therefore I am good. This is what is the structure of this argument, if you can see. Right? So this basically means I am good, therefore I am good. Same thing where in circular reasoning also you, or the circular reasoning example that I gave you in the previous one, God is real because Bible says so, and Bible is correct because it is from God. So it's circular. Circular means starting and ending point are the same thing. And this also would be circular because I am good, therefore I am good. This is the format of the argument structure over here. So is circular reasoning clear? And circular reasoning, you would notice if you do previous year papers or any of the mock papers, one of the options in structural questions is always the author is using circular reasoning, right? So circular reasoning means starting and ending are pretty much the same. Next we have in structural fallacies is inconsistency in the premises and the conclusion. So in inconsistency and advancing an argument in such a way that it is self-contradictory. That is, it is based on mutually inconsistent premises. So look at this. I never said most of the things I said. Or nobody goes there anymore because it's too crowded. So you see that the premises are and the conclusion do not make sense together. It's like writing a logical oxymoron. It's like writing a logical oxymoron. If you have noted this down, let me know. Tautology, someone has asked a question on tautology, which means I have done this, therefore I am good. This is what was the example for Donald Trump. Now, which pretty much means I am good, therefore I am good. You do not support by saying I have done this, therefore I am good. You have to give data. You have to give proof that so many thousand jobs are there. You know, there's no proof. You're just saying I have done this, therefore I'm good. It's like saying I'm good, therefore I'm good. You know, you have to give data. You have to show GDP. There are parameters on which you have to be evaluated. And everything is in the air. Therefore, people are really excited. Where is the data that people are excited about the big stuff? Now, do you understand? Is inconsistency clear to you all? Then we have the formal fallacies. These formal fallacies you must have done in conditional logic and in deductive logic. Affirming a disjunct. So don't worry about the name. When we say either A or B, I hope you understand A therefore not B is incorrect. It should be not B therefore A. So we'll quickly go through this because I think most of you are comfortable with this. So you don't have to worry about the technical term. It's nice that you know the technical term, but it's not something that is going to be tested. So affirming a disjunct, I think everyone knows this fallacy well. Affirming the consequent, whenever you say if A then B, it has to be A therefore B and not B therefore A. So this is also incorrect. I hope you know this. Right? Denying the antecedent. Again, technical terms are not really important, but if you do know, great. So in if A then B, not A therefore not B is invalid. I hope you know that as well. So please do keep saying yes in the chat box so that I get to know that you are sure about these technical fallacies. And then we come to fallacy of irrelevant premises. Great. So everyone is aware of these and I can see lots of yeses. That means we can move to the next category and do some of the fallacies from here. So which is fallacy of irrelevant premises. So in irrelevant premises, the first thing that we have is non sequitur, which means does not follow. In a general sense, any argument which fails to establish a connection between the premises and the conclusion is non sequitur, right? So this is another term for irrelevant premises. It is again a general subcategory of fallacies. And we move to the technical ones by and by. So most of the time when you feel that the premises and the conclusion are completely a misfit, then it is also known as non sequitur, which means illogical in a very, very simplified way of translating. So under irrelevant fallacies, we have a whole list of appeals. Appeal to novelty, also argumentum novitatis, that's the Latin name for it. And you also have appeal to poverty after this. So something is good or superior only because it is new or modern is an appeal to novelty. That means your argument basically stems from the fact that because it is new, it has to be better. Right? So I'm sure you will be able to spot it. Its opposite is appeal to poverty. So the opposite is also as faulty as appeal to novelty. Sorry, it's not the opposite of appeal to novelty. It's my bad. It's not the opposite of appeal to novelty. Basically, it is the opposite of appeal to being rich, right? So supporting a conclusion because the arguer is poor. So appeal to wealth is the opposite of this. Or refuting the arguer as because the arguer is wealthy. So in appeal to poverty, for example, in many traditionally poor countries, you know, usually it is appeal to wealth. You know, the wealthy people are looked uh, down upon or looked up upon. But it depends. For example, in an accident between a cycle and a car, the tendency is always to blame the car, for example. Right? You somehow believe that the wealthy car driver must be drunk or snorting or whatever, and the mistake is of the wealthy car guy. It could also so be that the bicycle took a wrong turn, came in the wrong direction, but mostly there is a bias against the car driver. Or when you have appeal to wealth, there is a bias against the, for example, if the wealthy guy says someone stole, there were 50,000 rupees in my wallet, and there is a poor worker in the room, there is always a tendency to believe the wealthy person. There is always a bias against the poor guy, because you always feel that guy must have stolen. So it is circumstantial many times, right? Appeal to tradition is a very, very common fault in the Indian scenario. I'm not sure if you can read this here, but I will read it out to you. Appeal to tradition means this practice or this conclusion must be true because it has been true for the longest period of time. Because something has been going on forever, it must be correct. Right? So this mode of government is the best because it has been followed for the last 200 years and no one has talked about changing it, so it must be good. This is known as appeal to tradition. I'll repeat. Of course, this mode of government is the best because we have had this mode of government for the last 20 years, 200 years, and so far no one has talked about changing it, so it has to be good. So just because something has been going on for the longest period of time does not make it good. So this is the opposite of appeal to novelty. I mistakenly said that for the other thing. Do you understand appeal to tradition? So most of the movies have this little dialogue, I don't know, you are not that century kids, but I don't know if you've seen this movie by the name of Mohabbatein. So that movie was a challenge to tradition, and the protagonist, one of the protagonists in the movie is Amitabh Bachchan, kept saying, ये परंपरा है, ये प्रतिष्ठा है, right? ये यहाँ पे इस स्कूल में, गुरुकुल में होता ही आ रहा है. So those arguments are completely fallacious. It does not make something correct if it has been happening for years and years and years. Right? Of course, the whole plot of the movie lost its game. I could not understand what was happening most of the time. But that was the aim, I think. Yes, so we've already discussed appeal to wealth. And I've given you an example of that. Then appeal to force, threat, or the stick or argumentum ad baculum. So basically, making someone agree to you through a threat is this. Right? So for example, you say, I hope you agree with me because the last guy who disagreed with me is now in a coffin. So this is a veiled threat. Right? Appeal to authority, but mostly irrelevant authority, is an attempt to justify an argument by citing someone who is highly admired or well known. But this authority is irrelevant because that person may have no knowledge of that field. I could not get over Donald Trump's tweets, when last I was making this fallacies PPT. I call my own shots largely because on an accumulation of data and everyone knows it, some fake news media, in order to marginalize, lie. So, justifying an act mainly by saying that I am the authority, even when you may not be the authority on that thing, or saying that you must believe this theory because Shah Rukh Khan believes it. Now, Shah Rukh Khan probably is not an authority to talk about that theory. It could be a science theory, it could be, a social theory. So, any irrelevant authority is also incorrect when you throw in names who may be famous but not necessarily related to that point. Then, of course, appeal to the crowd. It is also known as vox populi, right? So, whatever is the popular, or it's also known as bandwagon, jumping the bandwagon. So, something is correct because the majority believes in it, is this appeal to the crowd. So, majority of people feel that we should lift the COVID protocols now that everyone is infected. Does not make the conclusion right because a majority of people feel it. Right? It has to be either valid people who feel such a thing or people knowledgeable in that area, not just the voice of the people. Right? So many times we tend to fall for this appeal, we tend to fall for the crowd thing, or we jump the bandwagon. We try to do things because they are acceptable by a majority, or we are swayed by the majority. And we feel if so many people are saying this, it must be true. Right? But that is not valid reasoning. Great. Now we are coming to the largest group of fallacies. But before that, I would like to take questions on the two categories of fallacies that we have just finished. So I'm here now going to sit and answer your questions. So Quayash's question is that if it is relevant authority, will it be logical? Yes, it will be logical if the authority is relevant. Appeal to wealth means that between two people, one wealthy, one poor, I am believing or I am biased towards the wealthy because the person is wealthy. Right? As I gave you the example, if you are in a room and the wealthy guy says there were 50,000 rupees in my wallet and there is a poor man in the room, the bias or the natural incline towards believing the wealthy guy is appeal to wealth. Yes, appeal to crowd basically means getting swayed or using majority as the justification for something. So saying that because majority of the people feel COVID restrictions should be lifted, they should be. Right? So this is a fallacious argument because you're not giving valid reasons to lift the restrictions. Your premise is that lots of people believe in it. Right? Appeal to authority means I am citing a popular name to say that so-and-so also feels that the COVID virus, for example, I don't know, let's say Justin Bieber also feels that COVID or the coronavirus is a lab-made virus, right? So Justin Bieber is no authority on coronavirus, right? The person may be popular, the person may be a crowd puller, but that person is not an authority. So this is appeal to irrelevant authority. So your authority basically stands for irrelevant authority. Appeal to novelty is something is new, hence it is better, which is different from something is rich or someone is rich, hence it is better. That's the difference between appeal to novelty and appeal to wealth, Akshita. Yes, I can go back to affirming a disjunct. So affirming a disjunct basically means it is a fallacy in either or cases. If I say either A or B, what is a valid answer? Not B, therefore A. But if you say A, therefore not B, this is invalid. We have done this. Right? This is affirming a disjunct. Yes, so going back to inconsistency. Inconsistency, I explained that inconsistency basically means where I am saying two things that are opposites of each other and yet I am saying because or using a hence with them. Right? I said that it's like a logical oxymoron. So saying something like this, I do not go there anymore, or nobody goes there anymore because it's too crowded. Now nobody is going and still it's too crowded. This is inconsistency. Khwahish not, it does not work in strength and weaken questions or inductive logic. Right? I hope that answers your question. In strength and weaken questions, it is enough to say that cause does not happen and effect won't happen. It is a conditional logic. Ad hominem, I haven't reached that point yet. Right? So I'm going to take that up in the next class, hopefully. So this class we will stop here and I will continue with the unacceptable premises one in the next class. So I hope you liked the session and I look forward to doing more fallacies with you. Next week, again, we will have prime time session and I'm going to hopefully complete. If not, then whatever little is left, we'll take that up in the third class with a class sheet. All right. So thank you so much, everyone. We will continue this in the next class. All of you have a great weekend ahead.